Welcome to the Peak of Geek, where we hit the top but with no plans to stop. For some reason, watching someone play video games is extremely comforting to me. It actually might be connected to memories of watching my sister play games when I was too young or terrible to play them myself. I have vivid memories of gazing at our fuzzy TV as she beat Bowser on Nintendo, or peering over her shoulder as she figured out what to do in Sonic 2 on the Game Gear. I know what you're thinking, and yes, I do regret asking for a Game Gear back then instead of a Game Boy. But hey, it was in color, it had a TV attachment. In the 90s, that was the future, okay? These days, I still love watching other people play games of all kinds, especially if I'm having a tough day or some trouble sleeping. Whether it's a game I know and love, or one I may never find time to try out myself, it provides a soothing feeling that seems to bring me back to a time of innocent wonder. And while there are content creators out there I have to acknowledge, from the early pioneers of video game-based content like the Angry Video Game Nerd, or long-running Let's Players like the Game Grumps, there's a specific type of Let's Play video that brings me the ultimate comfort. And it's a rare type of gamer that I can watch over and over again and never tire of them, despite the fact that I'm watching it in Japanese with English subtitles. Because today, we're talking about the pure joy of GameCenter CX. GameCenter CX is a Let's Play video game TV series that shares a lot of similarities with a genre of TV show we don't really have here in the West anymore, the variety show. These shows often star Japanese celebrities and are widely known for their breakneck pace and odd or unconventional style and content. They can be about pretty much anything and continue to be one of the most popular forms of entertainment in Japan. Western game shows like Most Extreme Elimination Challenge and Wipeout are examples that were clearly inspired by Japanese variations like Takeshi's Castle, with MXC actually repurposing the footage to make a whole new show. Just like how Power Rangers reused a lot of footage from Super Sentai to make a whole new show for North American audiences. Before I go any further with sharing my love for GameCenter CX, I have to shout out the fan subbing community behind this show, whose words you'll see on the screen going forwards. From the original SAGCCX group that emerged out of the Something Awful forums, to the incredible humans at Goose Canyon and Location Scouts who have since picked up the torch, and to everyone else out there who has translated segments or whole episodes of the show into English, you are amazing. Thank you. GameCenter CX kicked off in 2003 and is still going strong to this day. It stars Shinya Arino, famous in Japan as one half of the comedy group Yoiko, alongside Masaru Hamaguchi. While the show was originally designed to be a variety show meant to celebrate gaming with interviews of creators, another segment quickly became much more popular: The Challenge. Simply put, Arino is challenged to get to the end of a retro game, and ironically, the first game he ever challenged was Takeshi's Challenge, the first and only game designed by Beat Takeshi, the same host of Takeshi's Castle. Takeshi's Challenge is infamous for being one of the worst video games of all time, and even took first place in Japanese magazine Famitsu's list of kusoge, or crap games. Anyway, Arino typically only has one day to clear even the most difficult of games. Starting in the second season, however, some games were allowed more time, especially if Arino felt he could get through it with an extra day or two. Because that's the thing, Arino is not great at games. Hey, I'm not one to talk. I've been known to save scum my way through a particularly difficult encounter or two, but that's part of GameCenter CX's charm. When Arino does eventually succeed, even if he does have a little help along the way, the hard-won victory is that much sweeter. In the early days of the show, a lot of focus was dedicated to the made-up GameCenter CX company, of which Arino works as a staff member. Hence the green jumpsuit, complete with the stitched logo. And of course, in the fictional world alongside this company, there are also pixelated commentators in the form of Dragon Quest NPCs. Well, obviously. Depending on Arino's performance in clearing games, he either gets praised or criticized and then promoted or demoted, with his title changing to Chief or Kacho in Season 3. Hence his trademark catchphrase of starting every game with GameCenter CX! While the game challenge is each episode's main event, the show does jump around between different segments, including one where Arino visits game centers or arcades, usually at the request of a viewer's letter or email. These game centers usually have a lot of game cabinets that we would be more familiar seeing at a theme park, with prize games like crane machines, but that's just the tip of the iceberg of what we see. In Japan, there are so many different arcade-style cabinets that would never find their way to the West, and seeing so many of them out in the wild is such a treat for us non-locals. And while the challenge and the game center trips pop up in every episode, there are other segments that lean a bit more into the variety show-esque nature of the series, like breaking down some of the games released in Japan over the years, exploring an overshadowed game system's history, reading manga with video game references, and many, many more. In other words, each episode is a retro game enthusiast's dream come true. There's a certain style to GameCenter CX, which is a big part of why it works as well as it does. The ones out there who've watched Japanese content like anime may know what I'm talking about here. When Arino is playing through these games, the way it's shot and edited with cuts, zooms, and audio cues, and how it's narrated is genius. It somehow all combines to make one person playing a video game seem vitally important and epic at the same time. It's similar to how in anime, situations and character moments are executed with 110% seriousness. It's a style of storytelling that I personally love, and it's on full display with GameCenter CX. But that's not to say this is a serious show, far from it. Arino is a comedian after all, and he's constantly cracking jokes at the game, at the staff, and himself. Mostly at himself. Speaking of the staff, they will often make appearances in comedic or supportive roles. There's a revolving door assortment of assistant directors who are always ready to support Arino's challenge. In most cases, they've already played the games and are at hand to provide secret codes to help him continue where he left off, or strategies, oftentimes drawing out a boss battle on the whiteboard, or to deliver supplemental materials like custom created maps, or even to join the game if there's co-op or if he's struggling with a specific part. However, they never forget that this is Arino's challenge, so even if they are willing to play some of the levels he's already completed, especially if there's no continue option as was quite common in older retro games, they always make sure Arino is the one to play the last level, or at the very least, make the deciding blow on the last boss. Other staff members like Kibe the scriptwriter, Abe the cameraman, and the many assistant directors that are usually replaced after each season, but sometimes come back for guest appearances or to fill another behind-the-scenes role, are honestly just as memorable and likable as Arino himself. Their distinct personalities and hilarious commentary combine with Arino's one-of-a-kind banter to create what seems like a fun show to work on and produce. It's wild to think about how long GameCenter CX has been on the air. Last month was the show's 21st anniversary, and it remains as popular as ever. At least in Japan. This popularity has even spawned not one, not two, but 3 different video games. 2 for the Nintendo DS, and 1 for the Nintendo 3DS. Surprisingly, the first one was actually localized here in the West as Retro Game Challenge, and I wonder how many people played this unique game without realizing the show it was based on. In it, you play a little boy in the 1980s who is friends with another little boy based on Arino, but an evil Arino from the future has tasked you with going back in time to play fictional retro games and complete various challenges, like making it to a certain stage or finding a secret warp point. These retro games are designed to feel like ones you've played before, but are wholly unique to this game, and still manage to be addictive in their own right. To help you along the way, you can also read each game's instruction manual, or browse magazines for tips and tricks. While the game was localized, most references and mentions of GameCenter CX were removed, including removing the assistant directors from the in-game magazine, and replacing Arino's voice with this.
Oh, good! Alright! Okay, let's do this!
Fortunately, the fan community put the voices back in with an undubbed version, so now we get to hear this. The success of the GameCenter CX game spawned a sequel 2 years later, but unfortunately this one stayed in Japan. But fortunately, yet again, the fan community delivered with a full English patch created by Aaron Tokunaga, the same translator who released a patch for the DS RPG Blood of Bahamut. GameCenter CX2 was somehow even better than the first, and you should definitely track it down and try it for yourself. The final game in the GameCenter CX trilogy would release for 3DS 5 years later. Indie Zero, the developer of the first two, would not return for this final outing, and according to those who've played it, they were sorely missed. As of the recording date of this video, there hasn't been an English fan translation, but it sounds like we might be better off. While the dedicated English fan community of GameCenter CX has single-handedly kept this show translated and alive in the West, it's not like official attempts haven't been made. In the summer of 2011, gaming website Kotaku began streaming official English translated episodes of GameCenter CX, rebranded as Retro Game Master, borrowing the font style from that first localized DS game. This more edited version of the show removed Arino's Game Center visits and other segments to focus solely on the challenge. And unfortunately, each episode featured a dubbed announcer who keeps referring to Arino as the Cacho.
Today, the Cacho,
which just doesn't work as well in English. I get what they were going for here, but instead of emulating the original Japanese announcer's epic narration style, what we get here is just plain awkward. And referring to Arino as a retro game master is a bit misleading. Kotaku only ended up licensing 12 episodes and chose not to renew it for a second season. Then, in the spring of 2012, Discotech Media acquired the rights to these same 12 episodes and released them on DVD later that fall. Meanwhile, at the same time in Japan, GameCenter CX continued to grow and thrive alongside Arino's reputation and reverence. Soon after the show began, Arino would start completing mini-challenges in partnership with the Big N to promote the Nintendo eShop. Rest in peace. A company partnership the show continues to this day. And over the years, he's had the honor of interviewing developers and even playing video games with some of the titans of the industry. My favorite of these segments is when he interviewed the late Satoru Iwata, the former president of Nintendo. They actually end up interviewing each other, and then Arino tries to complete a challenge in Balloon Fight with Iwata cheering him on the whole time. You see, Balloon Fight is one of the earliest games Iwata programmed. And while Arino isn't able to complete the challenge that day, sometime later, he receives a letter of support from Iwata, who apparently went home that day to complete the challenge himself. So, Arino tries again, and eventually, he does do it. It's a beautiful moment. And this is why Arino truly is a national treasure, at least when it comes to gaming in Japan. The man even has his own action figure. It's also worth noting that his Yoiko comedy partner Hamaguchi has also gotten in on the fun, and in 2015 began hosting his own show playing more contemporary games called GameCenter DX. And in November of 2022, to coincide with the show's 20th anniversary, an official YouTube channel launched with exclusive challenges and special feature type content. Speaking of special features, the show has spawned over 20 DVD/Blu-ray releases, which feature a compilation of that season's challenges, complete with an exclusive challenge just for physical media buyers. Celebrating anniversary milestones is also a major part of GameCenter CX. Usually this culminates in Arino doing a live show where he re-challenges a game he's failed before, like Mighty Bomb Jack for the NES or Lemmings for the SNES. But for the show's 10th anniversary, they decided to go a little bigger and try something a little different. Making a GameCenter CX movie. In 2014, GameCenter CX the movie 1986 Mighty Bomb Jack was released locally in Japan, and it's weird. Part of the movie features clips of Arino playing Mighty Bomb Jack across multiple episodes, including when he eventually cleared it live, while the other part stars a boy in 1986 who is a typical gamer. He plays Nintendo with his friends, but of course, there's also a girl. When she describes her favorite game, the boy thinks it's Mighty Bomb Jack, but before he can let her borrow it, a bully takes it from him. The film continues to jump back and forth between these two time periods, and it seems to imply the little boy is someone who grows up to be in the audience when Arino finally completes Mighty Bomb Jack live, and he comes on stage to support him. And even though the boy's contribution is kind of meaningless, I guess knowing he supports Arino when he beats this extremely difficult game in the future is supposed to inspire him to be brave and have confidence, I think? To be fair, there is something special here, but I feel the very different tones end up muddying the message a little bit. While I do appreciate the story told in the 1980s portion of this movie, with all the awesome and timely references to video games and Dragon Ball, I still prefer the parts where Arino is challenging an old NES game, despite the fact that I've seen these episodes a few times before. I think this says something about how enjoyable it is to watch Arino play video games. It's easy to find yourselves very invested in his journey, from cringing while he fumbles with the controls at the beginning, to cheering him on like you're watching an epic sports match when he takes down the last boss, if he makes it that is, and it's endearing how serious he takes his job. He knows fans are watching and counting on him, so when he starts feeling tired, he'll often remove that iconic green jumpsuit and apply a cooling pad to stay alert and focused. He also very rarely gets angry or frustrated, even when playing some of the hardest games ever made. He complains, sure, but he continues to smile, laugh, and stay positive the whole time. And that's why Arino has become such a comforting presence during stressful times in my life. Playing, watching, and more importantly, loving and sharing video games is what makes this a community united by a shared passion. And shows like GameCenter CX act as the perfect celebration of why we all love this interactive art form. And watching a middle-aged man fumble his way through difficult video games while slowly learning from his mistakes and getting better is almost the perfect metaphor for life. We all need to keep trying, keep failing, keep learning. Sometimes we accomplish our goals or finish the game, and sometimes we don't. But that's okay because at least we tried our best. If you consider yourself a fan of retro video games, or just video games in general, I encourage you to give GameCenter CX a try. I hope you find it as comforting as I do. And until next time, I suddenly have the urge to replay Sonic 2 on Game Gear, because for some reason, I suddenly feel inspired to make it to the ending. Catch-o on.